So I wanted to thank all of you for coming. My name is Mary Howard. For those of you who don't know me, I have been organizing a Discovering Italy series at the Sahara West Library in Las Vegas for the last 6 years. But because of COVID and the way things have been, we have not been able to do that for a while. So, so what we decided to go virtual because that's what the library's doing now. And so we're trying out using Zoom, and we'll see how it goes. And if we can get it to work okay, we're going to continue this. And I'm recording it so that we can actually put it onto YouTube and have it available for people who are not able to be on this meeting. So there is a chat, which if you see a little, looks like a cartoon where they talk into it. It's down at the bottom, and you can click on that to ask questions. And then at the end, then Karen will answer any of the questions that you have. So I want to, at this point, I want to introduce Karen Haid, who's our speaker tonight. She wrote the book Calabria, the Other Italy, and she's just written a new book called Basilicata, Authentic Italy. And so she's going to be talking about Basilicata, which will be really interesting because it's an area of Italy you don't get too much, people don't have a whole lot of information about. So I think we're going to learn a lot from her tonight. So with that, Karen, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary, and welcome. Buonasera. Good evening to everyone. I'm very happy to be talking about the region of Basilicata. And as Mary mentioned, I recently wrote a book, Basilicata, Authentic Italy. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the area in general, some of its traditions, its food. But let's start out with just answering the basic question, where is Basilicata? So here is the boot of Italy, and Basilicata is in what we refer to often as the instep, although I've heard some people say it's the ankle bone of Italy because it's a very mountainous region. You can see that it is surrounded by Campania, which is the region that Naples is in, Puglia to the east, and then Calabria to the south. It has a very small access on the water to the west in the Tyrrhenian Sea, as well as to the east on the Ionian Sea. You can see that down here. Population is about 500,000. And its size is about 10,000 kilometers, or about 4,000 square miles. And just to give you a sense, it's between our states of Delaware and Connecticut, a little closer to Connecticut. So it's a rather small region, but it's incredible how much variety there is. It's a very mountainous region, almost half, 47% mountains. So it's a very seismic zone. Then we have 45% hills, and then 8% plains. So very small percentage of flat area. However, there is a considerable amount of agriculture. So I'd just like to give you a few photos just from different areas to whet your appetite before I launch into more detail. Here is a picture of mountains. These are the Pollino Mountains. Here is a beach view. This is a beach on the west coast. So this beach, this coastline is very dramatic, rocky, a little bit like the Amalfi Coast. The other coastline is flat, sandy beach. This is probably the most well-recognized image, I would say, of the entire region. These are the Sassi di Matera. or the stones of Matera. This particular location has been used in many films, such as in The Passion of Christ by Mel Gibson, and also the coming up 007 movie. James Bond, or as they say in Italian, James Bond, is going to be screeching his tires through the streets of Matera. Here is some of the flatter land. This is in the town of Bernalda, which is the town where the ancestors of Francis Ford Coppola, the film director, came from. And here is just one of the many towers. So there are many, many castles in the region. So there's also a lot of medieval history. This is in the town of Fricarico. And then, of course, there are the local people and their stories. So to start off with, here is a map of the region. So this is just Basilicata. Administratively, Italy is divided up into 20 regions, and each region, depending on the size, has a number of provinces. Basilicata has 2. Potenza, which is the larger of the 2 provinces. This little mouse isn't quite going where I want it to go. So this is the province of Potenza. And Potenza is also the capital city. But Potenza is the capital city of the province and also the entire region. It has 67,000 people, just to give you an idea. The other province is Matera. And the capital of that province is Matera, with about 60,000 people. And that's where the famous Sassi di Matera are. Then there, as throughout Italy, there are mountains that come down the Apennine chain. As you can see here, they have the Lucanian Apennines all through here. And then down in the bottom, in the south, there are the Pollino Mountains that are between Basilicata and Calabria. And this mountainous area, it makes up the largest national park in all of Italy, the Pollino National Park. There are many rivers also in the region. The main rivers, you might say, are the Bradano, the Basento, the Agri, and then the Sini. And these rivers all empty out into the Gulf of Taranto, or the Ionian Sea, and go through the Metapontino Plain. And this is the flatland, or the flatter land, shall we say. And there are a lot of fruits. The area is well known for that. And then just a couple of things to point out. You see a little Greek temple. It's in the town of Metapontum. Remember that? And here there's an impressive Christ statue that overlooks the water. And one more thing, up in the north, we have Mount Vulture. Looks like vulture, but they say Vulture in Italian, Monte Vulture. And this is an extinct volcano. So this area has a specific characteristic to the soil and is grapes. That the Aglianico del Vulture is very well known. There are grapes in many parts of the region, but that's the best known area. So the name, Basilicata. As you look at the name, it sounds something's familiar about it. The word basilica is in the name. And in fact, the thinking is that's where the name comes from. That it was named after this enormous cathedral that was built by the Normans in the town of Acerenza. Acerenza, so you can see, was right here on the map. So they built this really majestic cathedral up on a hill. It's a very nice town to visit. And the thinking is that is where the name came to being around the 11th century. So it's been the name for about 1,000 years, but not for the whole time. And just to confuse the issue a little bit more, and this confuses even Italians. Here's an old map, and you see a name that goes across, Lucania. So just a brief history, or just a few words about it. The Lucanian people came from central Italy, central what's Italy today area. In about the 5th century, they moved down into Campania, the Naples area, then moved further down, settling in this area. And by the 4th century, this area was known as the Great Lucania. Of course, there were already indigenous people. Also, even before that time, the Greeks started settling the coast. Cyrus, for example, in the 8th century BC, Heraclea, Metapontum. Heraclea, for example, is important. There was a battle of Heraclea with Pyrrhus, the head of the Greeks, in 280 BC. This was the first time the Romans saw elephants right here in this spot. And they were so surprised that they didn't know what to call them, of course, and they called them Lucanian oxen. So just a little history there. And then shortly thereafter, they settled Potentia, which became the biggest city. And of course, there were already people in this area, but the Romans took it over. And Potentia comes from the word of potence, power. And then Venusia. And around this time, they moved 20,000 Romans in to Romanize the area, just you can imagine. And this here, where the little red dot is going, is the Appian Way, the famous Appian Way. So just to give you an idea. So it was the idea of this Lucania, and then it became Basilicata. Then during the fascist period, Mussolini wanted to harken back to the great times of the ancients. And so he then renamed the Basilicata region in 1932, he renamed it Lucania. And it remained Lucania until 1947. So many people from the region, even growing up in their history books, learned that the region's name was Lucania. And so there's even a little bit of confusion that exists today about the name. And to add to that, the people are called Lucani. In Italian, they'd be Lucani, in English, Lucanians. So she would be a Lucania, Lucana in Italian. And here she is in an outfit from around the year 1700 from a village near Potenza. So now let's look at a few of the places to visit, some festivals. Potenza, as I mentioned, is the largest city. It's not the most visited city. It's the highest altitude capital, regional capital, highest regional capital in all of Italy. Specifically 819 meters or 2,687 feet high. And they like to call themselves the Città Verticale, or the vertical city, because there are tons of staircases, incredibly long escalators and elevators all over to get from the lower part of the town to the upper part of the town. And the upper part, the old town, originally had a wall around it, and the wall is no longer, except for you see evidence of gates. And these are just some pictures from the old town. You can see the windows. Here's another image of Potenza, a tower with a modern building right next door. Another old gateway. And so you see many older buildings like here, and you can see the streets are very narrow in this town. But there have been many earthquakes in the area, throughout the area, in Potenza in particular, 1273, 1694, 1857, and there was really a devastating earthquake in 1980. So there, like I say, there are still many old houses and churches, but there's also some, we can call it newer construction, 18th century or 19th century here. In this case, construction. Here is a theater on the right, and one of the government buildings, the provincial government building. The a very highlight, really a highlight in Potenza to visit is the archaeological museum. And there are many archaeological museums in the region. Just think there are 8 national archaeological museums just in Basilicata alone. So you can just think about in the terms of how many museums here we have in Las Vegas, for example. But and they're really full of beautiful and valuable antiquities. I'm just going to show you one piece from this museum, not to burden you too much, but to give you also a little bit example of the history and what came before Rome and before that Greek history. So this came from a tomb, as most artifacts that we have that are this old came from a tomb in the town of Guardia Perticara. And this is from the 6th century BC, from the ancient Enotrians. You've probably heard that word before, Enotrians, from the word wine, but the ancient Enotrians that were in the area. So you can see this lovely container, geometric pattern on it that almost looks modern. And then these zoomorphic images on the top, and almost like human feet on the bottom to hold it up. So it's playful and hard to imagine that it could be 2,600 years old. So these museums really have just a wealth of artifacts. And I'm just giving you one example, one small example. Of course, everywhere in Italy, there are churches. Here is the cathedral from the town of Potenza. The cathedral is dedicated to San Gerardo la Porta, or Saint Gerard of Potenza, who he was a bishop there in the 12th century. And you look at this and you say, it doesn't look so old, but this is a Romanesque tower here, whereas the facade of the church and the interior were renovated in the 18th century. So the church was built around the 12th century over an early Christian church, but then, of course, as in most buildings, especially in earthquake-prone zones, they have been renovated. So the first time I went to Potenza, everyone said, oh, you have to come back for the Sfilata dei Turchi, the parade of the Turks. And this is the biggest festival in the town that sort of puts together history, religion, but not in a very specific way. It's not an historical reenactment, but it blends different events from different time periods, some of which might not even have happened right in Potenza. So Saint Gerard is the patron saint, and he is the little boy here in the boat. And for some reason, there's so many theories as to why he's pictured as a child, but he is. So he rides through the town. He sails through on this boat with Turkish prisoners pulling the boat, because the Turks did invade the region at one point, but there is not a navigable river in Potenza. So lots of different elements, but it's a big parade. And there are about 1,500 characters in the parade. Here are some of the Turks. And at first I thought that they didn't want me to take their picture. They looked angry, but then I realized that they were just playing a role. So they have their donkey. So 1,500, it's a lot of characters. So you have your angry Turks, and then you have your happy crusaders. Of course, you have your lovely harem girls, and then your ladies in waiting. There were men on horseback also. I don't have a picture in this presentation with me of the horses, but because they were always moving. The townsfolk, a musician, And then there's also another tradition because they put lots of tradition, of different elements together. And this is called the Iakara. What it is, it's a collection, a bundle of reeds, 1 ton worth. It's 40 feet long, and it takes them months. They start months ahead of time to put it together. They carry it on their shoulder. These young men carry it on their shoulder through the parade, and then at the very end, they put it up. And as you can see, they burn it down, and it takes many hours with the firemen at the ready and everyone else at the appropriate distance. So there's always food involved, of course, anywhere you go in Italy. And this was an outdoor, I went to an outdoor feast that lasted probably about 6 hours. Um, and I didn't know these young men when I first sat down. They're workers at the nearby Fiat factory in Melfi, which is pretty close by. And so I had a very nice time with them, and you really get to know people eating. And after that length of time, lots of singing and dancing, some of it on top of the tables. But here is just an example of an appetizer tray. And at first, when they brought it, I thought it was for the table, but no, it was for each person. So there was a lot of food, pasta, et cetera, and the sofrito, or the simmered innards, was much awaited by many of the local people. And then here we have the main street. So as I said, it's an old town, and so you can see it's not very wide. And this is their main, what you call il corso, the main walking street. So let's now move on to another area. This is the Vulture area. Once again, the volcano. And by the way, this is the only real important volcano east of the Apennine chain. So in the crater, there are 2 lakes. They're called the Monticchio lakes. It's a very beautiful area, lots of nature hikes, very beautiful area. And then you can see across the lake is this abbey, the St. Michael Abbey, which originated as a grotto of Basilian monks. Later, the church passed on to the Benedictines, the Capuchins, and the Order of St. George, and it was a place where pilgrims flocked. You can see it's a very beautiful place to come. And so they expanded, and finally you see this later structure from the 18th century. Now there's the church still inside, you just see, but a lot of the building is used as a nature museum. So this is the church, and it's very beautiful. And you can see the altar area is natural, and this is the area that the original monks dug out. Then if you walk back to the back of the church, there is a spectacular view out of the back window. So these are the 2 lakes in the crater. And so then over here was where I took the picture back up to the Abbey. So, and here is a view from at quite a distance, and you can see this is the volcano. And I took this picture from the town of Lago Pesole. That is a town that has a beautiful castle, one of many in Basilicata. This castle has a very interesting emigration museum in it. And I know a lot of people listening might be interested in that because, of course, there are so many Americans and people in the Americas, Australias, whose ancestors come from Italy. But what I found very intriguing about this museum was that I really felt the sense of loss from the Italian point of view, from the local people, how they felt with their family members and friends leaving to make their lives elsewhere. So this was a very interesting museum. And there's also a history museum, a history of the castle, and a beautiful church inside the castle. This castle was one of 29 castles that Frederick II, 13th century Holy Roman Empire, used to go around in. And so I was, what did I say? How many castles did I say? Yeah, 29. 29 castles alone, only in Basilicata. Of course, many of them are in ruins or not that much. And so these are the more beautiful castles. Probably the best known is the castle of Melfi. You might have heard the name Melfi before. This is a courtyard in Melfi. This was begun as a Norman castle. Melfi is a pretty good sized town. It has 18,000 people in it. Um, and just to give you an idea of the importance of this castle, it held 5 councils, what they call councils of Melfi, between 1059 and 1137. And in the third council of Melfi in 1089, Pope Urban II proclaimed the First Crusade. So, you know, when you hear things like that, you sort of say, that's real history. So it's a very important location. It's the castle is in a town that's a walled town, and buildings of varying styles within the walls. Here is the town hall, a noble palace. And of course, there's always the cathedral. This was an important pilgrimage town. This, as you can see, the tower looks very old. It's a Romanesque tower. And then, of course, the interior has seen many renovations. You can climb up the tower, from which you get a view to the castle of Melfi, which sits on the edge of the city. It's a very imposing building. As I mentioned Frederick II a minute ago, he selected Melfi as his administrative capital, this central gold treasury, prison, archive, and superior court. He also launched his what are called the Constitutions of Melfi, which was a legal code for the Kingdom of Sicily, which was basically southern Italy. And he put the legal code into effect from this castle in 1231 that was the basis of Sicilian law for the next 600 years. So very historic. You see names like the Via Normani, or the Norman Road, because the Normans originally founded the castle. And then you see Vico Pellegrino, or Pilgrim's Way. And here's the road that just goes up to the castle. And I tell you, walking up this road, you really have the feeling that, just because these buildings are smaller, and so you can just imagine way back when the pilgrims and even the crusaders came, that perhaps there were the tradesmen and people selling goods from these houses, and you went up to the castle. So this is the entrance, the castle entrance now. And I put this little picture, the falcon picture, in the corner, just to remind myself that in this area, Frederick II wrote his treatise on falconry. It was a scientific study of these birds that is still valid today. So there's a falconry spot near here in Melfi where they carry on this work. So of course there's a beautiful castle, and what is inside? An archaeological museum. So it's a very nice archaeological museum. Just have a couple items to show you from this museum. To give you an example of the people before the Greeks and the Romans, here is a helmet a bronze helmet from the 5th century BC. It came from a tomb, nearby tomb, but this was from what are called the Daunian people, another group of people that were a little bit to the in Basilicata and a little bit to the east in Puglia. And then here, archaeologists tell us that this vase is very, very important. It comes from the 3rd century BC, and it's a transition piece because it shows a procession that melds Daunian culture, Greek culture, and Roman culture. So the experts tell us that whether the clothes or the expressions or the instruments that they're carrying on the back, there are some musicians, they know that it's a mix. So in the 3rd century BC, this is an example of the melding of the cultures. And then to jump a few centuries further to the 2nd century, here's a spectacular marble sarcophagus from the 2nd century. This is Roman. She would have been a Roman noblewoman. And this was found nearby in the town of Rappola on the Appian Way. So this is Melfi. Nearby, there's another city full of history. Well, everywhere it's full of history. And this is the town of Venosa. Today has about 12,000 people. But this was the town that I mentioned that the Romans moved 20,000 Romans in to Romanize it. And so here you can see Roman baths. The archaeological site is a little bit outside the town itself. And so a lot of the historic site it remains. And then here, I could say in the back of the photo, is a very important church. It's the Abbey of the Holy Trinity, but the Italians usually refer to it as the incompiuta, which means the incomplete, because this was a project that was begun by the Benedictines. They conceived of this enormous cathedral, and there already was a church here, but they wanted to expand upon it. It was then taken over by the Knights of Malta, but it never was completed. But to give you an idea, this is the front door of the church. And this original church, Romanesque church, was built over an early Christian church, as well as you see there are pagan remains of a pagan temple. And it was a very important church for the Normans. A number of important Normans were buried there, such as names like William Ironarn and Robert Guiscard. So it's a very beautiful church, simple, as you can see inside, simple, but with lots of interesting detail, particularly in the flooring, various floorings from various periods. So that's the incompiuta. Here's one more picture. This is the back. So you can see here's the bell tower that you saw from the other picture. And of course, a lot of these architectural elements were taken from the ruins of the Roman city. So you hear Romans and you think maybe there are some catacombs, and there are. There are Christian catacombs as well as Jewish catacombs. Maybe something that you may not have expected. There was already a Hebrew community in the area by the 1st century BC, and then it grew with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. All evidence shows that the Christians and Jews, and even before very early Christians, they lived side by side, but of course their burials were separate. And in this Jewish catacombs, they have found 590 entombments and many images of menorahs. And there is writing in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Latin in on the walls. So it's a very interesting place to visit. But then once again, to jump forward again, there's the medieval part of the town, and here's a castle that was built in 1470. If there are any music lovers out there, Gesualdo, who was a famous Renaissance madrigal composer, was born in this castle. His family, shortly before that, were named the Princes of Venosa. By the way, if you've never heard of Gesualdo's music is beautiful, but he's also well known for having murdered his wife and lover in Naples. So anyway, so that's a claim to fame in this town, that it's the birthplace of Gesualdo. So there's also an archaeological museum in this castle. As you can see in the castle, there's a Roman lion's head at the entrance. There's a big ceramics tradition in this town, a number of ceramic stores and people working, painting on the ceramics. This lovely young woman painted in all different styles. She did some reproductions of the old ceramic, and then she had her own designs. But here, I chose this plate because of the person on it, the Quintus Horatius Flaccus, as we know as Horace. And it's funny because in Italian they say Orazio, and at first you hear Orazio, Orazio, who's that? Who's that? Everyone acted like everyone knew who he was. It's Horace, the seize the day Horace. So he was born in Venosa, Venusia, back in Roman time. And so here is the main square in the town, and you can see there is a statue of Horace. Here was another image that caught my eye in the young woman's shop. This is Carmine Crocco, and you see his image all over Basilicata. He is the most famous brigand of the region and one of the most famous in all of southern Italy. When you hear the word brigand, maybe you're thinking outlaw, but the word brigand in southern Italy is a Robin Hood figure. In southern Italy, during the time of and after of what we hear as unification, which is seen as not as a unification, but a takeover by the North taking over the South. And so especially during the period between 1861 and 1865, it became known as the Great Brigandage movement, and it really was a popular revolt. And so Carmine Crocco was a general. He was nicknamed the Generalissimo of what amounted to an army that would hide in places like the Vulture, the mountains in that area, also in the Pollino Mountains. So this was a very important movement. And there's a brigandage museum in the town of Rio Nero, which is the birthplace of Carmine Crocco. Yeah, matter of fact, he lived across the street from this building that's the museum now, and this was a prison during the brigandage movement. So it's also another interesting, but it explains a lot about the emigration and why there was such a mass emigration from southern Italy after unification. Before that time, more of the emigration was from northern Italy. So to change the topic, this is a spectacular little church. It's often called the Bible of Ripa Candida. That's the town where this is. It's some people call it the Little Lucanian Assisi. It's the sanctuary of San Donato with these incredible 16th century frescoes. The frescoes are from Genesis. As you can see here, we have the Noah building the ark, and they're wearing clothes from that time period. the 16th century. And there's also many images from the Passion of the Christ and saints. So this is a very beautiful church, also in that Vulture area. I have to, of course, mention the wine, the Aglianico del Vulture. You'll also find the Aglianico in the Campania region. But when it says del Vulture, then you know it's from this specific area of the Vulture. The Aglianico grape was imported by the Greeks in the 7th century BC. It has a very intensely ruby-colored harmonic. It's intensely ruby-colored wine. It's a full-bodied wine with rich tannins. It's a good wine. If you're in the area, you'll definitely get to try the wine, and also you might see it in a fine wine shop here in the United States or in a fine restaurant. This is also very interesting. In many towns, there are these wine caves. You see all these little doors, they look like little garages. And so each family, for example, would have had their own little cave, their own little place. And here's an example of one. But behind this door, and some of them are of course bigger than others, there was a winery with these modern containers and French casks. And here I am sampling the wine. So it's an excellent wine, highly recommended. So now to a little fun, shall we say. This is a town called Castelmezzano we mentioned the Lucanian Dolomites, because they have the jagged look of the Dolomites in northern Italy and in Austria, but the geology is different. But they're known as the Lucanian Dolomites. Beautiful towns nestled into, a couple of these towns that are nestled into the hills. And then you see these people here. And you say, what are they doing? They are flying. It's called the Volo dell'Angelo. It's a zip line that goes between two towns, Castelmezzano and Pietrapertosa. And I can tell you, it's a little bit heart-stopping because this is me. Just for some details, just because people always want to know, how far is the drop? It's 3,671 feet down above. So you're flying that's the drop. And you go up to 75 miles an hour. It only takes about a minute because it's about a mile, the whole distance. But so you're in this position, and it's called the flight of the angel, Volo dell'Angelo. So there are a few of these adventure type activities that attract particularly younger people. But just to give you an idea of what this town looks like to walk in amongst these boulders, it just feels as though the buildings grow out of the boulder themselves. And then at the very top of the town, you see this staircase in the rock, and you think to yourself, oh, that's another one of these adventure-seeking, newfangled sport. But this is actually called the Norman staircase because this was built by the Normans. So we're talking 1,000 or a little over 1,000 years ago. And so this was a lookout point. But of course, you do not have to climb staircases like that. When you're in a town like that, you can just sit back, have something nice to eat, and enjoy the beautiful architecture and everything else that the town has to offer. And this is the town at the other side, the Pietrapertosa, that the zip line goes to. And you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, there are those Dolomite-style mountains. There's also a very interesting, I did both to sort of compare them. And I write about it in the book, my experience on the zip line, as well as my experience walking from one town to the other. Because if you drive, it's about, let's say, 15 miles, because of course you're going zigzag, zigzag roads. When you walk, in a way, it's more direct, but the elevation change is really enormous. And it's on this old mule trail. So you really get the feel of what it would have been like for people to travel from one village to the next. And of course, most people did it by foot until very, very recently. So it gives you, it really puts you in the place of what it would have been like for, well, really everyone's ancestors in a way, because let's face it, the car was only invented recently. So here I'd like to talk about another town, mostly in this moment for its festival. This is the town of Acetura. It's also in a mountainous area, as you can see. And this town is known for it's what's called Il Maggio Festival. It's a festival that also takes place in a few towns in Calabria, a couple of towns in Basilicata. And it's an ancient marriage of the trees. It has roots in agrarian mysticism, and it's very interesting. It survived along with Christianity, and once again, like the Parade of the Turks, the Christian aspect is very much present in this pagan marriage of the trees. And so what they do is they have two different forests, and they take this large oak tree out of one forest. It was 98 feet, the one they took, and apparently they're always around that size on the festival when I went. So they take this large oak tree from one forest, and they take a smaller holly tree from another forest. And so the oak is the masculine tree, and the holly is the feminine tree. They bring them together in the town, and they raise it. To take the large tree, they use these incredible oxen. As you can see, these beautiful oxen. If you can see right here, there's a prayer card on his, between his horns. Here you can see it a little bit better. It's their San Giuliano, Saint Julian of Sora, with, of course, with beautiful flowers. And they take the large tree, but there are 60 pairs of oxen, so 120 oxen, and they need that many because they also take other smaller trees, because to get the big tree up, they have to prop it. So here I have a short video. And another short video. I stopped to say hello to his friend. How's it going? Tutto a posto. Everything's okay. Everything's good. So you could hear the bagpipes a little bit in the background. There's music involved, and it takes many, many hours. The timing of it all has to do with the church calendar. So they first cut the tree down the first Sunday after Easter. Well, the big tree, the smaller tree has to wait because it has to have the leaves on it still. So that's cut down right on the day. But it goes all the way to the Feast of Corpus Christi. So like I say, it goes with the church calendar. So here's the smaller tree, the holly tree. This one is carried from the other forest by usually younger people. A lot of wine is involved, and you can see there's a town. And so we have a little video of this also. So it involves everyone in the town and relatives who come back, people from the town, and it's also very popular with Italian tourists and people who can make the drive for a day or a couple days, stay overnight, and there's lots of food, lots of eating, and then once they come to the town, it's of course a big event when they come from the two different directions and they meet in the center, and then it takes a lot of work for the next couple days to put the two trees together. And then you'll see these pegs at the top of the tree when they raise it. So there's a whole pulley system over here. And it takes hours for them to lift it up. They just go a little bit at a time. They have to set this up every year because they clear it out because it's a little amphitheater in the town.
Ready.
Oh, Joe. So it takes a long time. And then once they have it up, of course, people climb up it. And well, a handful of people climb up it because it's very far and there is no net. There's some bunches of flowers that they put in the treetop before that the first person who climbs up throws down. But then, of course, there are always people who want to show us their agility. It's a long way down. So this is a very big festival. It has rides, lots of food, vendors, lots of sausages grilled. And here's San Giuliano. So, as I said, there's also the religious aspect of the festival. Here it is in the church, St. Julian of Sora. Another festival time, of course, is Carnevale, the carnival time, Mardi Gras time, and a town called Tricarico has put together what they call a Raduno delle Maschere Antropologiche, sort of a gathering of anthropological masks or costumes, because in several towns in the region, they have these masks that don't look anything like the carnival that you see of Venice, everyone trying to make themselves more elegant than the next person. These are meant to scare away the evil spirits. You can see the bells, and sometimes the bells are really enormous, and it really makes a racket. So this town put together this parade that brings together all of these carnival masks. And here's just a very interesting one. It's interesting costumes, interesting maschere, they call them, from the town of Satriano. Some people dress up like bears. These are bear costumes. They use sheep and goat skins for that. And then they have the trees, the people who dress up there like hermits. And the idea is they come out of the woods and come into the town and ask for alms. So it's a very atmospheric type of carnevale or carnival. And now to Matera, the most famous spot of Basilicata. It's a World Heritage Site. And in 2019, it was the European Capital of Culture. But say you hear about these cave dwellings, etc. What happened was, of course, there was the river that wore down both sides of the ravine, and then they found that they could dig out caves. Some were natural, some they dug out, and it goes back. They have evidence from prehistory that people were living in these caves. But in the 8th century, monastic communities started to come and build what amounted to churches. They were churches. They came from the East. And for example, this church was built or dug out in the 8th century. Later on in a lot of these churches' histories, some of them left the cave churches, some of them remained. This part of the church remained. This part here had all different uses over the many centuries. And at a certain point, it was used to live in, and there's even a little kitchen area within this church. But other churches moved to other parts of town, and they have the normal, what we would call normal European look to a church. And here is the inside of one of the cave churches. So at a certain point, attention was drawn to this area because it had become very unsanitary. The conditions were primitive, and they had to move the people out of the caves. Basically, they had people living in places that weren't meant to be lived in. They then became, they rethought everything and realized that they were very ecological, these caves, and there is an amazing system of cisterns underneath. Their water supply system was incredible, how they captured water in a more or less arid zone. So here's an example. In the 1950s, they moved people out. So you can see here is the Sassi area, and they built apartment complexes outside of the inner city. And but now people are going back and redoing these caves, and you can go in very fancy hotels, spas. Here's a restaurant in a cave, and this had obviously been used as a mill because in the back of the restaurant there is still the mill area. So these caves were used for many, many purposes. There were animals in caves for mills. And then here's just a picture of an Amaro de Sassi. Amaro is a bitter drink, and every area has their own. So this is the Amaro de Sassi, of the Sassi. Another example, contemporary art museum in the caves. So it's becoming very upscale. Here's a classic image of the Sassi, and also what you can see is that there were pictures of the caves, what's like inside, and then there were also a lot of buildings where they built above ground. So while there could be there is a whole complex underneath, you would need a 3D imaging to be able to actually see all the layers of the caves, the cisterns, etc. And then on the top is the cathedral, a very beautiful cathedral, Romanesque cathedral, that was built over an earlier Christian church. And here's the inside. Spectacular cathedral. On the walls, also on the sides, there are what you call classic paintings, sort of like this, and there are also frescoes that are much earlier frescoes. I gave a talk on Matera. Many of you probably came to at the library about a year ago. You could spend weeks talking about Matera. And here is a night image of Matera from across the ravine. So if anybody goes to see or streams the 007 movie that's coming up, it was supposed to come out in the spring, but it's coming out in the fall. I guess pretty soon you'll see him driving through the streets. And now we're moving to another section. That was Matera, not to be confused with Maratea. And here's the Amaro of this region, this town. You can see the picture of the area. This is the one that's on the coast. So now I'm going to do the coasts. This is the more dramatic coast. As you can see here, that it's built on a hill. The old town is built on a hill. Very beautiful location. This is just south of the famous Amalfi Coast. And here is the Cristo Redentore, or the Christ Redeemer statue. It's quite a large statue. You can see here are the people. You can walk right up to it. You can untouch it. It was completed in 1965. It's 69 feet tall and weighs 400 tons. It's made of concrete with pieces of Carrara marble to give it the white look, and there's a steel framework that goes way deep down into the ground. So it really makes quite an impression, and you saw the previous picture of the natural landscape. Well, here on the bottom picture, I have the cursor, I'm circling, that is where the statue is. So it, a little bit like Rio, has that really spectacular location. Right across from the statue is the cathedral to San Biagio, Saint Blaise, who's of the throats and wool combers, patron saint of throats and wool combers. And his relics, he's a 4th century saint, but his relics washed up on the shore in Maratea in the 8th century. The original old town was right around where this statue is, but then they built another town, a not as old town below it, and this old town up here was eventually abandoned. But for a while, both of the towns existed, and they began transferring the relics from one town to the other so that they could share them in 1695. But then they had an argument, and there was a decree from Naples, and the transfer was abolished in 1781. But of course, the people then found a way of getting along. And when they go now, do the transfer, they have a feast of the transfer, and the reliquary is covered up. So, and then they have this elaborate derobing. And this, unfortunately, it was a cloudy day, but this is that beautiful scene of the water behind. And so here he is with the red covering taken off and moving on the way with the carriers and, of course, a few of the carabinieri in their fancy plumed hats. guarding. So now to the other coast. And as you can see here, it's flat, it's very flat. This is Metaponto. It would have been what we would know as Metapontum, the Greek, ancient Greek settlement. This is where Pythagoras supposedly lived out the end of his life when he was kicked out of Croton in nearby Calabria, for the people who have read my Calabria, the Other Italy book. This was founded in the 7th century BC. And this temple, it's a Doric temple, it's called the Palatine Table. And this was built in the 6th century. Metapontum was a very wealthy area, very wealthy Greek city. And you can see here's an image of the side of a coin with a barley spike on it. So it was very rich in grain. And of course, as in many important places, there is an archaeological museum. And here is a really beautiful necklace from about the 6th century or 5th century BC. It's a Greek necklace, terracotta, with gold covering, gold leaf covering. And these leaves and these little bunches are grapes, so grape leaves and bunches and fruit. So it's a very, they've so many pieces I could pick in the museums, but I just tried to give you some what items that I really find special. Here is the town of Policoro, which was the area of Heraclea where the battle was with the elephants or the Lucanian oxen. So once again, in the summer, there's lots of the umbrellas set up and chairs, beach chairs, and there's the whole summer scene. Inland, more inland, there are what are called calanchi in Italian. They're what we would call in English badlands. That's about the only translation, eroded soil. And Basilicata is known for this. Unfortunately, because it wasn't always, it's not good for agriculture in these areas. But here is an image of the Calanchi by the writer Carlo Levi, who you might have heard of. He wrote a very famous book about the area of Basilicata, this area here, called Christ Stopped at Eboli. He was also a painter, and this is from a mural in Matera that he did in Matera. He was banished to Basilicata during the fascist period. Many political prisoners were banished to what they considered the ends of the earth during the fascist period, and that they were small towns in southern Italy. So he was banished to the town of Aliano, and after that, he wrote a book that was published about 10 years later, and it's been translated into many languages. And he really there was a light shone on this area with his book. And this actually is a photo that I took off of the roof of the house where he lived when he stayed in the town of Aliano. So you can see the prickly pear cactus with the fruit. So when people were banished to these places, it wasn't a prison in the sense that they had to be in a jail, or they were able to live in whatever means they had. So if you had money, you could rent whatever house was available and live in that style. So he lived pretty well the best he could for what he could find in the town of Aliano when he was there. Then nearby is now it's become a rather famous ghost town. It's called Krakow. You think, oh, ghost town, so you hear emigration, probably people left, and now it's empty. People did leave this town, of course, as in they left all towns, to come to the United States and to other countries to find better lives for themselves. But actually, this town emptied out because there was a basic landslide. It happened because of modern technology. They were building roads quite a ways actually from the town, but when they sunk the pylons that they needed to build the road, it disturbed the, the land underneath, and the ground shifted, and of course one thing led to another. But this was when this town was forced to evacuate, finally in 1963. It had a movie theater. It was quite large. Already in the 19th century, for example, there were 2,000 people, so it was a pretty big town. But they give a very good tour there, and giving the history of the area, and so it is a good place to visit. Here is a view from in the town out. So this was, if anyone saw this on Facebook, this was the photo that we used on Facebook for the cover of this presentation. And then just quickly, the Polino Mountains, just to show you something lush. These are the mountains with the Polino National Park, the largest in Italy. These are wild horses in the mountains, very beautiful mountains for hiking. There is skiing in Basilicata in several locations. Also rafting. So there are beautiful woods. Nice clean water. This is the Mercure River. This is near the spring, and there's actually a bottling plant of water that people buy in all of Italy from this area. Another view of the mountainous area in the Polino Mountains. Here's a town. You can see little towns like this popping up all over the place with the characteristic Scotch broom plants. And just one final note, because I talk about the Albanian community in Basilicata. There are many different ethnic communities in places in Italy, and you think of people coming recently, but the towns here, there are two towns specifically that I talk about in the mountains. San Costantino Albanese and San Paolo Albanese were founded in 1534 from Albanians who fled after the Ottoman invasion, and they were welcomed by the King of Naples, because the Albanians were very valiant in fighting the Turks. So I went to this wonderful festival, but by the way, the religion there is the Eastern Orthodox religion. And this is the outside of that church. And in this festival, once again, it married the festival of the Madonna with this sort of pagan ritual. And there are these I guess you would say farmer types. Well, you can see he is a shepherd because he's got the shepherd's crook, and he also has the ricotta basket, the characteristic basket that they put the ricotta in to drain. And you can see here, this is the characteristic dress. So these characters spin around, spin around, spin around, and finally they explode. And then when they explode, the procession can carry on. Oh, and I just have a few seconds of some bagpipe music. So the people in these villages will have spoken their ancient Albanian language, as well, of course, Italian. So last but not least, La Cucina Lucana, Lucanian kitchen, Lucanian cuisine. And here pictured is probably one of the most famous images in all of the region, the pepperoni cruschi, which are dried sweet peppers that what they do is they dry them in the sun and then they fry them quickly in olive oil and use them in many different recipes. So for example, here you see them, of course, drying together with the laundry on balconies, and they really look beautiful. Of course, that red color. And here you see the name. This is the plural. And of course, we know pepperoni for the pizza. It was salami on a pizza. But pepperoni in Italian means peppers. Pepperoni cruschi, like crunchy. They're very, very crunchy peppers. And you'll be able to see that. For example, you eat them as appetizers. Sometimes just plain is also excellent. But here they have them a little fancy on top of an orange with some sauce. And like I say, they're very, very crunchy. Another example is with pasta. This form of pasta is also very traditional in the area. They're called strascinati because the verb strascinare means to drag. And you can see they're made by dragging the dough. So here you have just a simple pasta with breadcrumbs and then the pepperoni cruschi that are crumbled and then with olive oil. So a very simple first course, simple pasta course. And here's an example of a second course. This is bacala, or the dried salt cod that you see in a lot of places in Italy. And then with this pepperoni cruschi, which really makes a beautiful picture with the red. So some of the foods that I'm mentioning here, of course, they eat your pasta with tomato sauce and sausages and cheeses, just like all over Italy. I'm trying to give you some of the foods that you might not have heard of before and that are really particular to the area of, or the region of Basilicata. These are called lampascioni, or sometimes lampagioni. And these they look like onions. You can see they're not that big. There's a fork and spoon so you can see the size. They're rather small. They're actually hyacinth bulbs. And you will find them in stews, sort of used like an onion. They're a little bit more bitter than an onion. Here, this is a very sort of special presentation where they're fried. It would be like an onion blossom or onion blossom. So yes, you would eat this. Not the leaves, but the lampascione. Here is a polpetta di pane. I want to use the word meatball, but of course there's no meat. So what it is you would call it a bread ball. So they would be made with the inside of a bread, eggs, cheese, parsley, a little salt, and cooked. And so you could have this, for example, as an appetizer, or they could serve them here as the same thing, but they put tomato sauce on it. This also is very particular to Basilicata and in the mountains, just one area. This is red eggplant, a little bit more bitter than regular eggplant. And here, just to give you an example of a plate of beef, this is the Podolica beef that comes from those large animals that you saw in the procession. Now, maybe not those, but, and then of course with truffles. So I ate this in the Polino Mountains. Of course, you have all of your cheeses. The caciocavallo, this type that is in the tier shape, traditional tier shape is very traditional. And also they might use that, or they often do, for, or have over a barbecue, hang the cheese, and then underneath put the bread and let the cheese drip onto the bread, really wonderful bruschetta with the freshly melted cheese. here is the traditional bread from Matera. So when you go to Matera, if you've been, you see this bread with this characteristic, it looks like a crown, but actually there are 3 slices of the knife to represent the Holy Trinity. And then there's all kinds of rules for this bread made with certain kinds of flour. The crust has to be a certain number of millimeters thick, but this is the bread from Matera. This is black chickpeas that I eat in the area that you do not see everywhere. You have to cook them a lot longer. They were very good. Chicory and beans, just a hearty lunch. So this is something that you would see everywhere, but just to show you a sort of I guess you should a peasant food, a good hearty peasant food. This is the type of food that you would eat in the mountains here, because of course the mountains are known for their mushrooms. Here are mushrooms with homemade pasta, wild mushrooms, and the wonderful pork products. I can tell you this pancetta went down like butter. And then with a house wine. And then the fruit. I had mentioned that area, the Montepontino, that has the wonderful fruit. They're known for their strawberries. All of the fruit that you see here is from that area. And when Italians see, oh yeah, fruit from Basilicata, they know it's good. And then to end with the best known Amaro, the Amaro Lucano from the region of Basilicata, came from originally from Pisticci. And as I say, this is the best known bitter in the area, and you'll find this throughout Italy. So I thank you very much for listening. I'll just tell you a few things about my book if you're interested. It just came out last week, so I'm very excited about that. It's available in paperback and ebook, and you can find it in most places. Just Google it. It's of course on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, et cetera, et cetera. I have a new website called with my name, KarenHade.com, and there are links to various places to purchase the book directly, so that if you're in Canada, you can, there's Amazon Canada, or if you're in Brazil, because a lot of people from Brazil, there are a lot of Italians, immigrants there, a lot of, but in other countries. So I have all those types of various links, also for the ebooks, for the Kobo and the Nook book. And then of course, if you don't know, if you haven't been following me, I have a website, Calabria, the Other Italy, the name of my other book, my first book. I didn't ever thought I would be saying first book, second book. And so that's why I thought I had to have the other website, not to confuse people with the other, my original website of Calabria, the Other Italy, where I have my blog. And so that is a place that you can browse through. I have over 100 articles with lots of pictures. There are about 3, I think, about Basilicata. Most of them are about Calabria at this point. I'll be doing more about Basilicata now. And there are a couple about some other areas, about Sicily. And so you can follow my blog. And then on social media, I have just started a Basilicata Authentic Italy Facebook page, and I put up maybe one picture or beautiful picture or piece of information a day. And I have my long established Calabria, the Other Italy Facebook page that is, of course, is about Calabria. And then Instagram is just in my name, Karen Hade, as is my Twitter page, Karen Hade. And I have to say, when looking at all this, I say, yes, it's a lot to keep it up. And for those who don't know about my Calabria book, here's my Calabria, the Other Italy book, the one that started it all. I lived in Calabria for 4 years and was inspired to write this book. And then after that, it's sort of like, what's next? And I decided to focus on a region that doesn't get much attention, except for outside of Matera. And so I decided to write the book about Basilicata. So yeah, so I have a lot of anecdotes, meeting people, and a lot about eating, getting around. And so that's I don't know what my next step will be. Of course, I started tours to Calabria, and when we are able to travel again, hope to be able to extend that to Basilicata. So that is the end of my formal presentation. So I see, let's see, I go up to, oh, I know what I have to do. I have to change this without the cursor. There we go. Okay. So I think there are chat comments. Ooh, lots of them, lots of them. Ooh, I see lots of chows. Ah, somebody did, Sheila says, I did the Volo dell'Angelo to celebrate my 70th birthday. I did it with an Italian friend celebrating her 55th. It was amazing, exhilarating. Thank you. Oh, that was privately. Oh, that was just to me. Okay, well, everyone heard. Interesting question. Tish asks, does the statue face the ocean or inland? This statue faces inland. And so, yes, it faces inland. It faces the church. It faces its people. So, yeah. I have someone who came from Genzano di Lucania who visited there in 1973 and said there were still dirt roads, but the views were amazing. And she has cousins there. Oh, thank you, Cindy. Rosanna, can't wait for the book to arrive. Thank you, Rosanna. Oh yes, so there's a chat that I'm reading from. The questions right now, I'm reading from the chat on the side. So if you look, there'll be a chat. Lisa, who I met this was amazing. I was in Gerace in southern Calabria, and I heard there were these people sitting at the next table, and I thought they were kind of staring. And then she asked me if I was Karen, and she had read my book, and she follows my blog, and she says, I'm enjoying your book now, and she's only been to Matera and hopes to see the rest of the region. Thank you, Lisa. I see Mary's comment. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Pam, thank you. Oh, let's see, I'm looking if there are any questions. I'm glad you enjoyed it. We have lots of very interesting, enjoyed it. And Rosanna loved my Calabria tour last year. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and Lauren is looking forward to studying abroad next year. Thank you for an interview. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that's the end of the, were there any more questions? Well, thank you very much. I don't know if Mary is, oh, did you ever visit Castel Grande? No. Was that Agata? Oh, thank you, Mary. Well, thank you. Oh, any advice for visiting Italy for the first time? Well, Italy is, that's a difficult question. Visiting Italy for the first time, because there is so much to see. Every time you turn over a rock, of course, who knows who turned it over before for thousands of years. So that's difficult. Of course, everyone who visits usually, of course, does the Rome, Florence, Venice, and then expands from there. And of course, there are beautiful things to see in the famous places, but they're, of course, a lot more crowded. So places like Basilicata, that's why it's the authentic Italy. You have elbow room. Kathy has made me laugh. Great presentation. Now I'm starving though. I'm a little hungry too, and I had a snack before. I'm hoping that this will be, I'll put this up on social media, and I know Mary has a page, and I would also probably put it up on my, I have a YouTube page also. I forgot to put that up there. I also have a YouTube page. I have not visited Genzano. Someone asked. Oh, that was privately, but that's okay. Yes, and Mary says we're putting the recording on YouTube, and we'll let you know on Facebook, or if you're in the Parliamo Italiano group, you'll find out, or if you follow my blog, I'll put that information out. So if there aren't any more questions, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your wonderful comments, and we'll look forward to the next time. Thank you. I don't hear Mary, so I don't know if she's coming back on.